So today we're going to go over the substitution method of solving systems. So the substitution method is a method of solving systems by which we substitute equations within one another. So we're going to write that down as the definition. So it's a method of solving systems of equations by substituting equations within one another. By substituting equations in one another, we end up working with just one variable, and then we can solve for that one variable. So step one is solve one equation for either y or x. So we're either going to isolate the equation for x and get x by itself on one side of the equation, or if it's easier to isolate for y, we'll isolate and get y by itself on one side of the equation. Then we're going to substitute this expression into the other equation and solve for the variable. The last step is once we solve for one variable, we can substitute our answer for that variable into the revised equation from step one and solve for the other variable. All right, so let's do an example. So remember, step one is to solve one equation for either x or y. So if I'm looking at number one here, this is the best case scenario because actually both equations are solved for y already. I've already isolated y in both. So what I can say is if y equals 4x minus 1, I can take 4x minus 1 and plug it in or substitute it in for y in the other equation. Now I'm dealing with just x's and I can solve for my x's. So I can subtract 2x on both sides. I can add 1 on both sides. Cancel out here. 2x equals -4. And then I can divide by 2 on both sides. I'm running out of room. Let me rewrite it over here. Cancels out on the left, and my x equals -2. If my x equals -2, I can plug -2 into either one of these equations. Actually, it does not matter which, and solve for the y. So I want to look for whatever equation is easier to substitute it into. So let's pick this first one here. So y equals 4x minus 1. I'm going to substitute -2 in for x. Y equals 4 times -2 minus 1. Y equals 4 times -2 gives me a -8. -8 minus 1 is a -9. So my solution is always in a coordinate form. It's in an XY form, and we can actually write that down. So solution is always going to be an XY. It's always going to be a coordinate. So I'm going to put together my x and y to form my coordinate -2, -9. All right, awesome job. So let's do another one together. So step one is always to take a look at your equations and solve for one variable in one of the equations. So if I take a look at my two equations here, this one would be kind of hard to solve for, but this first one is already solved for. Y is by itself. So that's awesome. That's the best case scenario. So I can move on to step two. I don't have to solve for it. It's already solved for. Step two is substitute. So if y equals 6x, I'm going to take 6x and plug it in. Plug it into y in the second equation. Now I'm dealing with all x's and I can solve for my x. So I'm going to multiply this out. 2x plus 18x, those are like terms. They can be combined. And I'm going to divide by 20 on both sides. If I divide by 20 here, it cancels. I get x by itself. If I divide by 20 here, I get -1. So now what I can do is plug x in, or plug -1 in for x, and whatever equation is easier to work with. This first one's easier to work with. So y equals 6 times -1. Y equals -6. So I'm going to put it together in a coordinate form for my answer. So -1, -6 is my solution. So if I were to graph these two equations, essentially this point right here is where these two equations would intersect. They would cross each other. So let's do one. I'm going to do number 5. Because that's one of them where we don't have an x or a y already solved for. So let's do number 5 next, and then you can go back and do these example problems, do the rest of these example problems on your own. Okay, so number 5. We have to isolate a variable. So we want to look at the two equations and figure out which equation is easier to work with to get a variable by itself. And it looks like this top one might be a little bit easier because y is already by itself here. There's not a number in front of it. So I could just subtract 2x on both sides, and then that would give me y by itself. So let's do that. Okay, so I solved for y. Now, if y equals -2x minus 2, I can plug -2x minus 2 in for y in the second equation. There we go. And now I'm going to start to solve for x. So I'm going to distribute this 3 into both of the terms in the parentheses. I'm going to combine like terms here. Add 6. Divide by -1 on both sides. And I get x equals 2. At this point, what I can do is plug x equals 2, plug 2 in for x in the equation that I already isolated for y, and then solve for y. So when I do that, I'm going to do y equals -2, and I'm plugging 2 in. and then I'm solving for y. Y equals -6. So my solution, putting them together in a coordinate form, is 2, -6. Okay, so take these examples and try out a few on your own.